Okay, fantastic. A very warm welcome to the 4th of May, which is the third session for our May wine month. We had a couple of fantastic sessions already, and today we are joined by Laura, who is going to teach us how to pronounce the brand that she works for. And I'm not even going to try it until I've had the official education. So I will hand over to Laura, who's going to talk us through today's presentation. So thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, as she says, as she just tries to get her presentation up and running. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. We're going to have a little walk through the magnificent legacy brand that is Vergelegen. I come from Kent, as I was saying to Richard, so there's absolutely no excuse for anyone not being able to say this brand. I'll crack on straight away. I know we've got half an hour. I know some of you have got wine and some of you haven't, but as Richard said, any questions or anything, just pop them over and I'll try and answer them as we go or afterwards. Okay, so first of all, Vergelegen. It's a Dutch name and it simply means far away or situated far away. Why? This brand was established in 1700, so you've got 323 years of legacy. And when it was originally founded, it was a 2-day wagon ride from Cape Town. That would have been in the times of the 5 big game. It would have been dangerous. Now it's just a 45-minute drive. So again, if you go to South Africa, do get in touch and we'll make sure you'll get a visit. Not quite so dangerous anymore. So founded in February in 1700 and regarded as one of South Africa's top 3 heritage sites and a legacy wine brand. Why a legacy? The history, the heritage. It's got a long and interesting parentage, which I'll take you through quickly before we move on to the wines and the sense of place and the unique site that we occupy. We're on UNESCO's tentative list to become a World Heritage Site, which in itself is rather unusual for what is deemed as a wine brand. And we've also run South Africa's largest private environmental project on the estate, which has the same protection as the National Kruger Park. So again, I'll talk you through a little bit on the background there. So what are we and what do we do? So we're 3,000 hectares in size as an estate, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is relatively large. When I started to work with the brand some sort of 12, 13 years ago, I remember turning up and thinking it was a lot like Jurassic Park. We have 117 hectares of vineyards, so not quite the 3,000 hectares of vineyards. We're not that big. We have a heritage core with 60 hectares of gardens, and we have around 100,000 visitors a year. I'll explain why that's quite important, actually, especially for on-trade in a little bit. And 2,300 hectares is a private nature reserve, which, as I said earlier, is under the same designation as the Kruger. The spokes of our estate, as I like to call them, we have wine, we have heritage, and we have hospitality. So this is today, obviously, we're here to talk about wine, but good to understand a little bit of what else we do. So this is a lovely aerial view of my beautiful homestead. We originally had 2, apparently, according to the site records. The founder was William Adrian van der Stel, who was the governor of the Cape. His father actually founded Groot Constantia. There was a falling out in the family, and he decided that he would try and build an estate to rival his father's and some of the best European estates in the world. So nothing like a bit of ambition, is there? He established Vergelegen. Amongst his kind of vision for the property were vineyards, originally planted to blue muscat and other indigenous grape varieties. He laid out fruit orchards. He planted camphor trees. Camphors, I don't know, but really interesting for you guys to know if you don't already, were planted because of their medicinal properties. If you smell a camphor twig and you break it, it smells a lot like albus oil. And so they were used on the chests on the spice routes to transport clothes, etc., to keep moths out. So at the start of our homestead, let me see if you can see it here. You can just see it actually. At the back of the homestead, you can see this line of trees. They're actually camphor trees, which are designated national monuments in South Africa. They look a lot like redwoods. They're absolutely ginormous. We had cattle stations, sheep stations, irrigation, a beautiful Dutch homestead, and a corn mill, and obviously many outbuildings. So in terms of the way I think about this property and the way I like to explain it to people, it really is what we would deem as a national trust estate. and not just this small kind of, little winery that's making a few bottles of wine every year. So where did we come from, and why is our sense of place and our positioning so wonderful to make wine? The estate was originally 30,000 hectares, which is just, it's honestly just so difficult to try and imagine a property of that, how enormous that property would be. It encompassed Vergelegen, which we can all say now, Lawrenceford, Morgenstern, and Clottenburg. At some point, that was split into the various farms, and Vergelegen stands as it does today at 3,000 hectares. It moved through many families. It was always family owned up until 1987. It had started to fall into a state of disrepair, and the Barlow family bought it. I'm sure you'll be aware of the Barlow family in Rustenburg, etc. So one of the brothers bought it and started to develop it into a wine farm, and wanted to open its historic core to the public. We're now owned by Anglo American. It was bought, like I say, in 87, and the whole thought behind Anglo American buying a property of this magnitude and magnificence was purely to give it back to South Africa. It was seen as a jewel in the South African crown, a legacy brand, and the investment that it required to get it back to a point where it was able to be used for visitors and to be able to produce wine meant that we needed a parent company with quite deep pockets. And so therefore we were lucky. We managed to secure that, and Anglo now sit as our parent company, but have very little to do with the day-to-day running of our property. I often say I've been here for a long time, and we are just as dysfunctional as any family you will find at head office. So what's been going on, and why are we where we are today? So there's been somewhat of a renaissance, especially in South African wine over the last 3 or 4 years. But in terms of my estate and the way that we have established ourselves, we have invested money into gardens, cultural heritage, and, as I've mentioned earlier, the most amazing environmental project, which allows us to call Vergelegen home to some eland, which are the largest antelope in South Africa, actually in the world, and also a number of bontebok and something called a quagga, which is essentially a zebra, which is indigenous to SA. So we've got this fantastic environmental side, wonderful homestead, and now, just to finish it off before we get to wine, I just wanted to mention we've welcomed some wonderful dignitaries over the time. You can see from the slide there's some quite interesting people here, including our lovely late Queen. But the one thing I would like to mention, the reason I bring this up, is that we have quite an interesting link with Nelson Mandela, in that when he was released from Fallsmore Prison, he needed to have a meeting and know that it wasn't bugged. And so he came to Vergelegen, and the new democracy for South Africa was mapped under our camphor trees that I mentioned to you earlier, which I think really does establish us as a place that is really quite unique in its positioning. Okay, so this is why you're here. That gives a little overview of what we are and where we come from. And now we're going to go into vineyards. I have just come back from South Africa. I've been on the property for the last 2 weeks. And I knew that I was going to be talking to you guys, so I had the pleasure of running around with our viticulturist as well, just to make sure I was, up to speed on any questions you may pass my way. So I will do my best. First vines were planted in 1700, as I said to you earlier. They were Blue Muscat and various indigenous grape varieties. Over the years, the wine side fell into disrepair, and it was only in 87, when Anglo American purchased us, that we actually drew up a plan to plant our vineyards. So although we're a very well established brand, I say we're a legacy brand because we're the 3rd oldest in South Africa, our vineyards are still, albeit 30 plus years old. We're not hundreds of years old when it comes to winemaking. We're rather famous for a multi-level sunken gravity flow cellar, which you can just see the top of here in this yellow photo. That's literally the lookout. The rest of the cellar is underground, and I'll show you a little bit of that in a bit, and we'll talk about it. It was opened by the Rothschild family, which is always quite a nice little nugget of information. The one thing to mention about Vergelegen is our name is somewhat larger than the sum of our parts in many ways. We're not huge. We don't tend to make numerous varietals, and we don't make a Chenin, and we don't make a Pinotage, which people sometimes find quite interesting. What we are very good at is focusing on site-specific parcels and blocks, and in my farm, Cabernet is very much king. And again, I'll talk to you about that as we move through. So vineyards, this is what we are all here to have a little talk about. So Vergelegen is surrounded by mountains on the northerly and northeastern sides and open to the ocean on the southern and southerly eastern side. So what I mean by that is we are essentially sitting in a basin, is the best way that I can describe it to you. We are flanked by the Hottentots Holland mountain range. And then we look out towards Force Bay. So, like I said here, Force Bay is about 6.5 kilometers away. So we have this very unique positioning on our property where we have the mountains pushing cooler air down and mists down, and we have the ocean bringing cooler breezes in. I was talking to my winemaker last week, and he said in Stellenbosch alone there are 7 microclimates, and we tend to harvest really quite late, and we tend to harvest for quite a long time. So our harvest will normally start, give or take, beginning of February, sorry, and we will normally end around second week of April. So looking at the geology of the site, it's thought that originally we would have been underwater and that the soils are mostly decomposed granites. I have a lot of conversations about soil, and I have done recently. And what I've found is that everyone seems to have a very specific story about soil, but so do I. So ours are over 600 million years old. They're very poor organic matter. And if anyone is very interested, I was very, very conscious of the fantastic brief from Richard. I didn't want to fill this slide up with millions, this deck up with millions of slides, but I have photographs coming out of my ears of soil. So if you want them, let me know and they'll be coming over. We have, so very poor organic matter, leading to quite small and concentrated yields across the sites. 21 different types of soil that have been identified, amongst the most ancient in the world. And for those of you who really want to delve into this, I've just named a few: Clovelly, Glenrosser and Pine soils. Again, I have photographs of all 3. If you just think like a red dust almost for the Clovelly. Pine is like decomposed granite, quite nutrient, not many nutrients left there at all. And Glenrosser again is like a red dust. All have high clay content, which if you think we were originally underwater, it kind of starts to make sense, this geology of the site. The interesting thing about Vergelegen is we are almost all dryland vineyard. So 117 hectares are mostly dry land. The drip irrigation that we have is the most minuscule amount going into a couple of the Sauvignon Blanc sites, but everything else is dryland vineyard, and we are totally water sufficient on our farm. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on this, because I think being South Africa, it's really quite interesting. There are 3 dams on our property. One is 28 meters deep. Up until about 12 years ago, we had 2 dams on our property. We had the largest dam that I've just mentioned, but it wasn't 28 meters deep. We undertook the biggest private environmental project in South Africa to clear alien vegetation from the 3,000 hectare site. And what I mean by that is South Africa was planted to what we call aliens, and these would be fir trees, blue gum, Australian bush, which eat our water table. And what we'd realized is that if we removed the the non-indigenous vegetation, as we would call it in this country, there would be a good chance that our water table may start to regulate itself. And it did. And so over 12 years, and with a lot of manpower, we removed pretty much 99.9%, with the exception of nesting sites or shade, from a just over 2,000 hectare plot, which is our environmental site. And what that did was create another dam for us. Now that's important for the wine side because we're totally self-sufficient in water. The water obviously comes from the mists that are coming down the mountains, the natural springs from the mountains, the clay content in the soils that we've covered, the mists from the sea. So totally self-sufficient in water. And the current plantings, as I've said here, 117 hectares, mostly made up between the varietals that I've listed. Cabernet Sauvignon is dominant, as is Sauvignon Blanc. Everything else are either small parcels or small blocks. Something else just to mention to you, I don't know how many people have spoken about leaf roll, if anyone yet, but one thing to say about Vergelegen is we are 99.9% leaf roll free. It was a project that was undertaken on the farm that started around 14, 15 years ago. If you remember, I said our vineyards were planted just in the late 80s there. So we came from, obviously researched rootstocks well. The leaf roll virus is spread by the mealybug. As you can see, this rather attractive white bug here that you can see being paralyzed by, by a natural predator is the issue. And what we have done is we obviously have natural windbreaks that try and stop the mealybug carrying on the wind from other properties, neighbouring farms. But no matter what we do, they will always find a way in. So the way we control them is we test the vine twice a year. We test the vine's temperature actually. And if the vine's temperature shows that it's too high, we will remove that vine and the soil surrounding it and leave it dormant for 2 years. We also then, I love the idea of how we do this. We invest in some small critters that are a little bit like a ladybird, maybe not quite as attractive, who then come in and they will paralyze the mealybug by laying their eggs inside them. Why do we want to get rid of leaf roll and these little guys? Because they are responsible for, or we believe they're responsible for, the slightly tarnished flavour you may find in South African wines. My farm believe that comes from leaf roll, and as pretty as leaf roll looks in the vineyard when it's going through what it looks like as autumn almost, that's when you can see it. You can really see leaf roll on red vines. You can't really see it on white. It's very difficult to see on the white vines, on the white grapes. Yeah, so trying to eradicate leaf roll has been a huge part of our journey. And why have we done it? What's the result? Why is it interesting for you? Because it means there is the most exceptional purity of fruit that run through the Vergelegen wines. And this does come down to sense of place, the unique microclimates, the maritime climate that we have, our proximity to the sea, our mountains shielding our vines, the correct plantings on the correct sites. But it also comes down to getting rid of these guys. Okay, so the winery, I just want to touch on the winery because it is quite unique. It's unlike any other that I've ever seen, multi-level, only the top of it is visible. It's all sunk into a hill so that we didn't disturb the natural beauty of our site. It mirrors the design of our homestead walled garden, which is an octagon because at night the cattle would be brought in the days of Van der Stel and be locked inside the octagon and they would be safe from the lions. The wall was built just high enough so that a lion could not jump over it. Gravity flow, and we try and make wine in the most natural way as possible. We don't spray. The only time we will spray is for downy mildew. We use natural predators in the, as I've just given you a close-up of one, in the vineyards. And we also have the most fantastic way of rodent control, which essentially is some posts that our owls and our birds of prey sit on. So everything is done as well as we can and in harmony with the environment. We're vegetarian and we're vegan accredited. And our Gravity Flow winery is really just part of that, as being as natural as we can, handling the wine only when it needs to be handled, not pumping it over 100 times, not overdoing it, trying to create the wines that, to your brief, Richard, that the site produces, not the wines that we want to produce. And that is why, as well, just mentioning Pinotage and Chenin, that's why we don't produce a Pinotage and Chenin. It's purely because we don't believe our site would do it well enough. So this is, I know this is a funny picture, but to see the winery, you have to kind of look at it from above. And this octagon shape, this is just the top of the winery. And then underneath that, there are 3 floors and a barrel cellar, etc., etc. So it is really quite unique. And James Bond did ask if they could film there. Sadly, my parent company said no, but it would have been cool. I know, don't. I know, corporates, ridiculous. I think I'm aware of time. I'm a chatter, so I could chat to you about Vergelegen all day. I know some of you have got the wine, some of you haven't. There is a little bit here on the wine if you've got it to taste and why it's so wonderful. I will say very quickly, Semillon, the Semillon that you have listed, and thank you very much for your support, is here purely because I begged for it. We don't make lots of it. It's here because I like to drink it mostly on Boxing Day, and that everything about this wine is just mind blowing. 100% Semillon, made from three vineyards, crafted from three vineyards, dryland vineyards. I was speaking to my viticulturist about Semillon. I'm just looking at my notes here and seeing what he said. And he said to me, Laura, the one thing you don't want on Semillon is too much water because it will make the grapes burst. They can get very watery, can get very heavy. So we're obviously very careful to treat these vines as badly as we can. We ensure that it's a very low yield. Canopy management is all about making sure the vines get enough light. Everything is handcrafted, everything is handpicked across our whole estate. And this is actually, like I say, just three very small blocks that the Semillon comes from. Whole bunch pressed, best quality juice, and then you can obviously see the vinification there as well that I've noted down in terms of oak. So when it comes to tasting it, the one thing I'll say about the Semillon is we have the most fantastic natural acidity on our property. We never acidify. And I always get this lime citrus core with a little bit of blossom, like lime blossom. And as it ages, and it ages really well, if it's around for that long, you get this fantastic almondy flavour coming through. But a really good example of New World Sem, I think myself and one of our other friends in South Africa do the best Semillon. They're both very different. I won't mention them because I won't undermine myself. But there's two people who do Semillon well, and we're one of them. So enjoy.
Thank you so much. Unless there is one question on the chat from Ryan. Of the 21 soils present on the site, which soil type requires the most human intervention to ensure the yield stroke production is to your standard, i.e. which one is the most, it's a typical Ryan question, which one is more challenging?
I love that. I love that. And the funny thing, had I not just been there, I wouldn't know the answer to that, but because I have. So Clovelly actually is apparently very, very tricky. It doesn't have as high a clay content, according to Rudolph, my viticulturist, as the others. And therefore that is the one that if we do ever need to add, like if we did need to do drip irrigation, it's normally around that subsoil. However, he did also say to me they're all tricky in their own way. But the Clovelly is the one that needs the most because it doesn't have the clay base, or it does, but it's not as much, you know.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there may be other questions. One question for me. So, obviously the wine is on our core wine lists by the bottle. What style of food do you most like to enjoy it with? So for the guys on the call, what would you recommending as a food and wine pairing for the?
I think that so Semillon. Sorry.
Vergelegen.
Oh,
okay? Was that
very
right?
Good. I can tell that you've noticed.
I've been practicing. That's all I've been saying for the last
no,
half an hour.
It's very people will come in actually. Just I'll answer your question about food and wine matching, but otherwise I'll forget. People will come in and say I've been there, which is why I've mentioned how many visitors have visited us. And when I do events, or if I were to come and do something with you guys, honestly, people turn up with photographs, or they know someone who got married at the property, or they had their 21st there. So be prepared for it. They may not be able to say it, but they will certainly recognize it. In terms of the food and wine matching, fish, I think, works really well with Semillon, especially, the 2020, which is what you guys have got, which is our current, is known as being a classic vintage. The three vintages before, we had a very bad drought. And so very accessible, good fruit, great acidity, really good with white fish, but very good with creamy pastas as well, I would say. Grilled fennel, if you've got veggies, grilled vegetables tend to work well. It can even take asparagus, which I know can be a funny mix with some wines, but our Semillon tends to find its place with these grilled vegetables. Fish, chicken, I would say, if you asked me, crab risotto and our Semillon, I think would be a stunner.
Sounds nice. Sounds good.
It does, doesn't it? Now I'm really hungry.
just for anyone that can't read the chat, Ed's just popped on there a fact that, so based on your total production, which is, you said 6,500 bottles, and that would be worldwide, guys, we actually take 5%, so we're selling about 5% of your total production.
No, okay, so our total production isn't that. So what have I put on there? Sorry, that is not right.
That's the UK.
So we've got the capacity to do 50,000 cases a year across the brand.
Of the Semillon?
No, of the Sauvignon, no, of the Sauvignon. Our Sauvignon's tiny. It's not even 6,000 cases. Our Sauvignon would be about 500 cases.
Right. So okay. So the total volume is by label or by that's the Semillon.
So,
there was a
so the
stat there
Semillon
that
would
said
be
6,500 bottles of Semillon are produced, small production.
Yeah,
so we do about 500 cases of it,
right,
of 6 a year, and we don't produce it every year.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
okay.
that's
it is.
Yeah, that's right then.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's sorry. I got confused with my total production, which is 50,000 cases. Saying that, we tend to hit the capacity at the winery is 50,000 cases of 12 across the range. The way to think of it actually is quite interesting. There's a sliding scale. So the Cabernet and the Sauvignon Blanc tend to be quite a big proportion of that. And then, like I say, everything else is these tiny little parcels. The Semillon here, I mean, once it was listed with Hotel de Van, you're seen as my flagship for Semillon now because of the number of sites that you have. And so to support a listing like this with you guys, where you've got the ability to actually tell the story of the wine and the vineyard and how to say the name is incredible. And yeah, Ed, you're right, it's tiny production.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laura. Guys, are there any other questions? There aren't often. Well, look, I will say 2 things. So firstly, a big thank you to Laura and Ed from Fells for helping me organise today's session and running the session. Really interesting. Great to hear the story. I want to go there now.
Please come.
And then tomorrow, Friday, the last session of the week is with Elias Mora. So Elias Mora make our Buy the Glass Vergelegen. So yeah, please join us for tomorrow's session. But a final thank you to Laura, and guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Take good care. Bye bye, everybody. Bye.